how much work is contained within my inbox today. It turns out it's a lot, right? It's everything like find all my invoices, send them to my accountant, categorize them, extract the important details. Like there are entire pieces of software that just do that task. And so I think when you start to turn these into like a set of instructions that the AI can follow and deliver kind of high quality results from, and take away the need to like orchestrate three or four different tools and logins and pieces of software, that's incredibly powerful.
There was just a bunch of different projects that I was working on, a whole bunch of different emails that were in a bunch of different threads. And so I just went into Gemini and said, summarize all of my emails into a project summary for this particular group that we're working with. And it went through all of my emails and pulled everything together, who I was talking to, when I talked to them, what the steps were that were already taken, what the next steps are, all that kind of stuff. And it just put together, here's a complete summary. And so I did that 5 different times with 5 different partners that we're working with, and it was just done.
Aaron Massecar, who doesn't even believe in AI glasses, is becoming more and more comfortable expanding his use cases. We should expect that consumers everywhere are starting to uptick their usage of AI. Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Veterinary AI Brief. It is good to be back. I am your co-host, Robert Sanchez, joined by the AI avatar of Dr. Adam Little and the always handsome, ever-present Aaron Massecar. And do we have a show for you here today? I can't believe that, I've been out of pocket for maybe a month now as our little girl came. You're seeing the aftermath as my office has been quickly turned into a mother-in-law unit here, and wouldn't it so happen that it came in the most consequential few weeks of AI development that, I don't know, maybe we've seen since, ChatGPT was released originally. So here's what we're going to do here today. We are first going to talk about the frontier of AI development and what that does specifically for the veterinary industry as far as use cases, and how to think about where we are right now, where we're likely to go. We're going to dig into industry news. There have been some pretty incredible announcements recently. We want to help you make sense of that, what's relevant to you and what could be an important tool for your practice. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about some data that we just recently published as far as consumer usage that we're seeing with AI and how that is very clearly changing things quickly in our industry. So first things first, we have got to talk about, for the first time, not ChatGPT, we are talking about Google, because earlier this week, Google released Gemini 3. And the long and short of it is that Google was a player that was basically laughed at, even though they did the pioneering research that created the framework for LLMs to be built, like ChatGPT. They were laughed at when their answer to ChatGPT a few years ago was Bard, objectively a terrible name. And now, basically with Gemini 3, they have created likely the state-of-the-art model in artificial intelligence. We haven't seen another company eclipse ChatGPT's capabilities until this week. We have a new all-around leader, it looks like. And the incredible thing that this unlocks is Google is not just looking at chat interfaces like, OpenAI largely is. They are really taking more of a multimodal approach. So we saw an update in image generation that is cheekily called Nano Banana Pro that has enormous ramifications, we believe, right now for the veterinary profession. There were some other really incredible capabilities that they showed off that is going to pair with their distribution advantage to embed AI in way more applications that people are already using. That is likely going to change the game very quickly. Before we get into that, I'd love to help the audience make sense of just how important of a jump this is. Adam, do you want to dig into really what the big benchmark changes were and how those benchmarks are brought to life, real use cases for the profession?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. So as you mentioned, this was kind of a long-awaited announcement. You can kind of title it "The Empire Strikes Back," but obviously Google has like kind of unlimited resources, has been incredibly kind of diverse in its AI use, and at the same time, I think people had been for the last kind of couple of years watching and waiting to see, okay, at what point are we really going to see them challenge in a really meaningful way OpenAI's growth? And I think um, Gemini 3.0 is kind of that maybe moment where it has been building for a while now, but with the release of this model, in many ways clearly ahead of Anthropic and OpenAI and XAI's development. So I'm just going to maybe flip to the benchmarks, and then we can kind of talk a little bit about some of the other ways that people are kind of experiencing and seeing this. So let me just toss open my screen for a second. So these are some standard benchmarks that that the industry, measures across a number of different areas. You might have heard things like Humanity's Last Exam before, the ARC AGI prize, which is now kind of version 2 because version 1 was not sophisticated enough, areas of math, screen understanding. And obviously, as you're kind of going with Gemini 3 Pro on the left-hand side, you can see that it's obviously a big leap forward from Gemini 2.5, but in many of these categories ahead of GPT 5.1. So I think the big takeaway there is like it's a great option. You're going to get probably a lot of value out of it, and I think for your individual workflows now, trying the same sorts of queries that you were trying on ChatGPT or Claude, if you haven't given Google a try or Gemini a try, certainly do so. I think the other point that we'll talk about is the advantage that Google has by embedding this intelligence across all the places that people are already working: Maps, Gmail, Google Docs, etc. And so I think that there's a lot of people that the first time that they might really be exposed to some of the capabilities of these frontier models is when they become embedded in products that they're already using. And there's a rumor that Apple is going to be partnering with Google to help power the next version of Siri. And so obviously there's lots of people that, their Siri still doesn't know their name or their calendar invite. And so you can imagine overnight the next version of Siri getting remarkably better powered by models like Gemini. So really good, really interesting to see. And I think this just kind of falls back into one of the themes that we've been talking about, which is that rapid rate of progression. So I wouldn't be surprised if a couple, months from now, OpenAI releases something that surpasses Gemini in a bunch of other metrics, and the kind of the race continues, and the capabilities continue to push forward.
It kind of makes it ridiculous, all this chatter about an AI bubble, because we know, for example, these two frontier labs have better reasoning models that they're going to be releasing in the next few months. So the pace is clearly continuing on this logarithmic curve. But Adam, what I think would be really interesting to dig into with the audience here are like maybe what are some of those use cases? Because I think you're right. The significance of this is you now have the frontier model embedded across all these applications that people regularly use. So one example that I saw that I personally got really excited about is presumably once, I don't know if this is rolled out quite yet, but you'll be able to go into Gmail, you'll have Gemini right there, and you'll say, Gmail, what are all of the emails that I really should have responded to by now, but I haven't? Could you queue those up for me, give me kind of a briefing on them? And then more than that, could you do your first pass draft at my responses to those emails so that I can effectively have an all-knowing personal assistant who is helping me do a lot of that, grunt work that I normally would take a long time to do or wouldn't, ever be done. So really curious if we do start seeing not just professionals, but consumers with access to AI embedded within these applications that we're already using, both in the Gmail universe and pretty soon to come, it sure seems like, Apple users. What are some really interesting ways that we're likely going to see that shift capabilities?
I think the Gmail example that you gave is actually a really good one because it's something where like today, or even 6 months or a year ago, you could build and stitch together tools using something like Zapier or Lindy to build an assistant that's capable of doing that. But the problem with that is it still requires just a little bit too much knowledge and too much friction and too much cost for your average person that's just saying, like, look, I just want it to happen. I just want it to work, right? I don't really have the patience or maybe the technical understanding of these tools to sort of stitch them together. And I think that there's something about this broader concept where it's kind of the future is here, but it's not evenly distributed. And when you take these frontier models and embed their capabilities in the workflows that you already have, like Gmail, like your calendar, like your PIMS, you end up creating a much broader surface area for these capabilities to find you and to help you, and really lowering the friction to creating some of those personal automations. So you start to look and you say, okay, how much work is contained within my inbox today? It turns out it's a lot, right? It's everything like find all my invoices, send them to my accountant, categorize them, extract the important details. Like there are entire pieces of software that just do that task. And so I think when you start to turn these into like a set of instructions that the AI can follow and deliver kind of high quality results from, and take away the need to like orchestrate 3 or 4 different tools and logins and pieces of software, that's incredibly powerful. Things like summarizing like a YouTube video, right? Hey, I don't want to necessarily watch this entire thing. You know me, figure out what pieces of context are important. And so I think it's two components there. And one is the surface area in which the AI can interact is expanding and getting far deeper. So it can do things in Gmail that it just couldn't before. It can do things in Google's products that it couldn't before. But also, it's going to start consuming all the context about you as you move through those different products. So as opposed to having to be like, oh, I'm a veterinarian and I like to respond to emails in 2 days, it will know much more about your preferences, and much more about your needs and context that can help inform, not just better responses, but more tailored actions. And I think that is a really important battle, which is also why OpenAI is creating browsers and devices, because there's just sources of context that some companies have access to and others don't. And that's going to be a really powerful level of differentiation. The other thing that I think is going to be really critical is like the level of abstraction, right? Because on one end, you're going to want people, there's going to be people who like, they want to go behind the scenes, they want to wire it all up, they want to look at the building blocks, they want to adjust the personality. And then there's going to be another user that's like, I don't want to do any of that. I just want it to work. And I want you to know what I want. Right. And so there's a pretty broad spectrum there. And so I think that level of abstraction and that user interface and how that builds stickiness in the experience is really interesting, because it will mean that even if a model like Gemini surpasses ChatGPT or GPT in certain benchmarks, it might not matter to the same degree if ChatGPT has more context for you and you're more familiar with it and you've set up different ways in which you incorporate it into your lives. ChatGPT, for example, just launched group chats as well. And so benchmarks are awesome, but I think the surface area in which you experience these products, the stickiness to those surface areas, and the depth of context that it has on you, the user, end up being much, much more important, especially when the benchmarks are not orders of magnitude different.
I think you're totally right. I think benchmarks are useful maybe for academics, but what people really care about are use cases and shifting behaviors. Now, I'd love for us to dig into what I think like the most actionable use cases right now, maybe besides email, which is Nano Banana. But before that, Aaron, I'm really curious to hear your take and maybe some of the use cases that you see as really interesting, either that are potentially being overlooked or are now emergent because of these new developments.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned like the email stuff, because that's exactly what I did earlier this week. There was just a bunch of different projects that I was working on, a whole bunch of different emails that were in a bunch of different threads. And so I just went into Gemini and said, summarize all of my emails into a project summary for this particular group that we're working with. And it went through all of my emails and pulled everything together, who I was talking to, when I talked to them, what the steps were that were already taken, what the next steps are, all that kind of stuff. And it just put together, here's a complete summary. And so I did that 5 different times with 5 different partners that we're working with, and it was just done. Like it was just done. And so Adam, when you describe those people who are like, I just want the answers, I feel like you're much more of the, I want to build the Zapier, I want to build this, I want to, and I'm like, I'm too lazy for that. Like, I
Yeah,
just
not
want
a
the
chance, right?
answers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it does it, and so I was kind of playing around and I was starting to look at some of the other things that we could potentially do with it. And I grabbed a neutering video. So of somebody actually performing a neuter. And I said, okay, what could I actually do with this? Could we do video analysis? Because Gemini 3 apparently does video analysis really well. And I'm like, all right, off the shelf, could this actually perform a video analysis? So I went into Gemini and I said, give me an SOP for performing a neuter. And then I took the video, uploaded the video, and I said, analyze the video relative to this SOP that you just created. And it came back and it was step by step. Did the video match the SOP? And it was able to analyze that video sufficiently in order to be able to say, here were the things that you got right or wrong. Well, so it turns out that the video that I got was from my wife, who teaches spay neuter at Colorado State University, and she did some things wrong, right? And I sent it back to her and she's like, oh, it's because you have the wrong SOP. So I put in the new updated SOP because she uses high quality, high volume spay neuter techniques, which include things like autoligation. And based on her SOP, she got perfect. So she was pretty happy about that because she needs to get 100%. So it's stuff like that that we could start doing right away. And I think this will lead into a much more interesting conversation down the road when we think about the educational impacts of some of these technologies that are available just kind of off the shelf. Okay, so those were a couple of things. Another thing that I did, because we're getting into the winter months and I just wanted to figure out what is the cost of actually running my heater and my furnace at home. And so then I took a screenshot of my therm use over the past 2 years and I uploaded that. And then I gave it a screenshot of the cost per therm currently, uploaded that. And I said, okay, what would it cost for me to run my house at 65 degrees over the course of the entire winter? What about 70 degrees? What about if I had from 4 to 9 p.m., 70 degrees, and then every other time at 65 degrees? And it gave me a full breakdown of everything. So it averaged out the cost per therm, the usage, all of that, and said over the next 3 months, you're going to spend $635 if you run your house at 65 degrees, or you're going to spend $720 if you run your house at 70 degrees. But if you want a sweet spot, this is what that would look like. And so I think that this keeps coming back to this central theme that we have, where the gap is not in where AI is today and where it's going to be 6 months from now. It's where is AI today and how are people using it today? And that gap is enormous. And so if we can start to bridge some of that gap and say to people, hey, take the information that you have. I was very clear. I didn't put my credit card information. I wasn't just grabbing a statement and it had my account information. It didn't have any of that kind of stuff. Just take screenshots of information that you have and upload them and see what kind of results you're going to get. Now, I didn't do my due diligence and then go back and do the calculations myself. So I'm, again, like I said a little bit before, I'm kind of lazy when it comes to this stuff. That was enough for me to move forward and say, okay, I'm going to reset my thermostat to the following degrees over the next 3 months. And so I think that there's just a huge area of use where these tools, as they are today versus where they were a year ago, are substantially better for our decision-making capabilities than what we would normally do on a daily basis. Because normally I'd just be like, I don't know, 65 is kind of cold and 70 feels good. Therefore, I'm just going to do that, right? But I think that there's way more that these things are capable of. And in particular in VetMed, there's a ton of use cases that we can start deploying these things in.
I think the main takeaway here for me is that if, Aaron Massecar, who doesn't even believe in AI glasses, is becoming more and more comfortable expanding his use cases, we should expect that consumers everywhere are starting to uptick their usage of AI. Hell, my dad went on a trip to Europe and he used ChatGPT, the guy who I grew up seeing constant battles with the VCR and, many VCRs thrown away. We are just seeing all of this comfort advance. Now, what I'd love to dig into here before we end this segment is what I personally think probably the most actionable advancement is for the veterinary profession, which is the image generating and editing capabilities by Gemini 3, which is affectionately referred to as Nano Banana, our Nano Banana Pro. Adorable nickname. If you want backstory, you Google it, or I'll tell you at a conference sometime. And So what we've seen, actually, you know what? I'll show you something that I have cooked up. Yeah, I'm going to
I
show
got
you.
some ones lined up as well. So
Yeah,
show
this is
get your favorite, Robert. Get your favorites out.
yeah, yeah, you got it. So basically, just a little bit of background for you. What Nano Banana is so incredibly good at isn't just the precise, lifelike image generation, but really the overlay of text into that image and the ability to break down complex topics into a visual format that makes it really easy for people to learn and see. So I wrote a blog post recently on Spotlight, which is like our product around intake. And the blog post was on the context gap in veterinary medicine and how we believe there's an unlock in getting all of context from a pet owner upstream, getting like what their actual preferences are for the visit, what the observations they've made at home are, how their pet likes to be handled, all of that. And it's a really cool blog post, and a lot of people won't read that blog post. But what I did was I fed this to Nano Banana, and I said, okay, and let me share my screen here. I said, Nano Banana, I shit you not, this was my like prompt to it. Turn this into an infographic. That's all I said. And this is what it gave me right here. Like right away. So the vet visit context gap. I said like in the style of a professor with a whiteboard. And you can see it very cleverly kind of parsed what the major points of the paper are. I didn't spoon feed it any of that. So it's showing you like the status quo and the contrast. It's actually like really good storytelling here, why it fails, and then the fix. And I shared this with my amazing chief operating officer, the famous Allie Klein, who hopefully we'll be able to drag into this show someday. And she said, Robert, this feels overwhelming to me, and I'm just not going to look at it. So I said, all right, Gemini, make it simpler. And it gave me this, the vet visit fixing the context gap. This took me all of a minute, right? This took me all of a minute to get to this point. And so like the real takeaway here isn't just that I get to play with a new cool toy. Think about all the information that a practice has that they would like to disseminate to clients, but right now it's just not easy to get into a format that's highly visual and understandable for most people. Discharge notes. Imagine a world where you have like your discharge notes for a client, feed that into Nano Banana, and it gives you like a really visual like instruction guide that could even integrate like that pet's picture in a really cool like 3D avatar way. Or every single blog post that you write, turning that in the snap of a finger into a highly educational infographic that you can now hand out in the practice. I mean, we're going to start doing this for every single blog post that we write at Digital Empathy because it's just so damn easy to do, and it increases the value of all the knowledge work that's being done. Anyways, I'm going to kick it over to you guys. I know you have some examples and thoughts too, but this is just, to me, the first product release that I see as being so tangibly exciting in some time for the veterinary profession, because I think like the two unlocks to me are like diagnostics, and we talked with Bill Tancredi about how like, hey, it can give you that 7th, 8th, 9th differential that can challenge you to think differently, but also client communication. And this just really up-levels our ability to disseminate information to clients. So what do you guys think? What have you been seeing and playing with?
Go for it, Adam.
Yeah, it, yeah. Like I think to your point, Robert. Sometimes it's hard for when you get these kind of new models. Like, is the response better? How much better? It was good enough before. Maybe you weren't asking those types of questions, but this is something where like, oh, the result visually was unusable before, or just did a really terrible job, and now hey, we've kind of crossed that. So maybe just a couple examples that I think highlight that progression. Hopefully, my computer does not crash again, but see, um, can you see this? So a couple things right off the bat. Aaron, Robert, you good? You can see
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
Awesome. So like multi-character, images, right? So you can see on the left here, these are all the input images. This is this lovely little family of, I don't even know what you call these creatures, but again, character consistency has been a challenge. From a pet perspective, you can imagine, hey, I want to generate some sort of discharge on this dog, and it looks like a Clumber Spaniel, but not the Clumber Spaniel of that particular client. And if I want to use that image again and again, it just keeps changing the person or the picture or the pet or what have you. Now the ability to have multiple characters, that character consistency, we're kind of reaching that point. Another one, I really like this image because it just highlights the jump even between the Pro model and Nano Banana. So the prompt here is create an image of an analog clock reading 1532, 332, not digital and no other time, a burger with a grilled golden provolone cheese and a glass of red wine filled to the brim. So on the right side, this is the Nano Banana, not the Pro version, compared to the Pro version on the left. And you can see like, this is close, right? The red wine's there, the provolone cheese, but the clock's wrong. It's not really the burger and the wine's not filled to the top. And so at the end of the day, like that's not accurate. And in some cases, maybe it's close enough, but it isn't accurate enough for a lot of these cases versus on the left-hand side, like clearly has nailed it and it cropped it off that the wine glass was there. And lastly, the ability to actually like take and annotate images. So this was the transformer architecture, and you can get Nano Banana to actually like annotate all these different pieces of that image, or taking a step further, explain paper scientific concepts. This is a cartoon of a T cell, but again, being able to almost remix any content to produce any visual form is now very much possible. And what's particularly interesting about that is this is just the starting point. Those images will then be able to become videos, and those videos will become full-length films. And so this kind of separation of, oh, I go to this model for text, and then I go to this model for image, and I go to this model for video, and I can't really build upon them or edit them or transform them. I feel like this is all kind of colliding. And as a result, taking a step further, when you're doing those chat responses, the AI is going to be able to render the perfect UI element at the perfect time to do that specific action. And so when you think about like our veterinary software, how much of the screen real estate and the complexity is because you're looking at a bunch of information or actions that are not really what you need to do that specific job. And I think when you start to that starts to, disappear into the background, and the AI in real time is saying, okay, you want to book an appointment? I'm rendering the calendar widget. Or when you're checking out a client, this is the payment widget. Or when you're going into an appointment, this is the summary piece of information. And in real time, you're able to render the perfect element, not even more generally, but for that user in the way that they want to digest that. I think that's where you start to really open up a completely new way that people are interacting with software. And certainly in the very, very immediate term, it's a heck of a lot of fun to do these sorts of things and play around them with kids because you can bring their stories to life and things of that nature. But I think there's a lot of professional use cases that just became a lot more real than they were a week ago.
I think it's interesting. And I remember this was probably 5 years ago or so, where I was watching somebody use Avamark for the first time, right? It's like sitting in a clinic watching somebody use Avamark. And I said, how's the experience with Avamark? And they're like, oh, it's great. And I'm like, but I just saw you click 5 separate times in order to get to the window that you need to get to. Do you enjoy it? And they're like, oh, no, it's terrible. But it's the best possible thing that exists that's out there, right? And they've gotten used to it. And so I do wonder, like, because there are definitely these points of friction that exist for veterinarians and their staff and everyone that works around the clinic. There are these points of friction, but I wonder the degree to which they're going to see the leapfrog that's about to happen with some of the software. So instead of having to click through things, which they've become so accustomed to that it's almost just second nature for them to do that, I wonder if they're going to quickly see the benefit of having something quickly serve up for you rather than you have to click through a whole bunch of different windows to get to where you need to go.
I think we're seeing that friction being removed in real time. Absolutely fascinating topic. Uh, I'd love for us to move next to industry news because we've had a quite a month there as well. Adam, could you walk us through what we've seen and what's relevant to our audience?
All quiet on the Western Front, Robert. Let's move on to the next topic. Yeah, I know, just playing. So I mean, I think this is a little bit of the run up into the new year where I would expect VMX and WVC are going to have some pretty significant kind of announcements and demos. And the way that I kind of think about this is you're seeing, I think the paths of these different companies that maybe in the very beginning of the year seemed very close together, you're seeing some shuffling and re kind of categorization of the different leaders and the capabilities that they're bringing to market. So obviously, some funding news. Digital, which is one of the kind of fast moving AI native PIMS all in one systems, raised a fairly significant round. I believe it was the Series A or B, but anyway. Um, a sizable enough round that clearly the traction that they've been getting, and it's a little hard to know how many clinics, but I think they talk about having 10,000 veterinary professionals. That sort of vision of the future where, the PIMS is at the center, it's all in one, it's all connected and AI is embedded throughout. Digital's been pushing that vision for a while now. And I think with this additional funding, certainly is well positioned to continue to execute on that. And I think you're really going to a certain point, one of the things that we've been hearing from the market is like, I want one tool to rule them all. And I want to have all these capabilities kind of deeply integrated. Well, this is a company that's making a bet that says like, yeah, it's going to be your PIMS and it's going to be this digital workforce effectively that is provided through your PIMS. So that's kind of like one approach to the future. I think that there was a couple other announcements that maybe highlight different approaches. Auto, which is another kind of large pet owner engagement platform, recently this week announced their pilot. It's hard to know. It's not really a feature, but maybe like an intelligence layer that's going to touch around their entire suite, which includes a scribe, which includes a lot of like workflow management tools. And again, not a PIMS, sits on top of the PIMS, but a lot of the workflows that Digital and others are automating, auto sees in their strike zone and will continue to apply AI for. And so it'll be interesting to see again, like what sort of uptake that gets and how it maybe changes how people are using the software, because it stands to reason that in their announcement, they kind of go through the ways in which AI is going to be creating campaigns and helping you with analytics and helping to manage task assignment. Does that sort of like an AI kind of workflow management tool where there's just AI agents throughout it that are sort of now piece by piece taking over tasks and jobs? Is that the right interface, right? So you have one that's saying it's the PIMS and it's kind of like an AI native PIMS. Then there's one that's, it's kind of a workflow tool. It's on top of the PIMS. There's other tools that it touches, but the experience looks very different. And then lastly, there's obviously been a lot of...
Before you get to that,
Yeah,
Adam, I'm wondering what company do you feel like should be most worried about Auto's advancement?
I mean, I think that it's not so much what companies should be worried about it. I think it's where does the work take place, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're a company that integrates with auto, it might just further entrench that PIMS because now you don't have to switch your PIMS in order to get the access to those benefits. And so I look at the PIMS environment as always being one of like an ecosystem, because I think it's very difficult to actually do an all-in-one PIMS that decrease it. Like, are you going to build your own diagnostic platform? Are you going to build your own inventory? Like maybe, and there's going to be a lot of folks that try to go that route, but I think that there is a lot of strength in leveraging the ecosystem, in part because a lot of these tools are very, very different. There are four different categories of scribes right now. You have companies like Auto that has a scribe. You have native scribe companies. You have all-in-one scribe companies. And so I don't think it's going to be like one option fits every use case and every person. But if you are forcing people into a choice where they can't bring their own tools or they can't have access to it, depending on the strength of their ties to those third-party applications, it's going to dictate what PIMs they end up keeping or switching to. And I remember this with GoFetch, where we were like a very, very small wellness fund company. But for a couple of practices that we work with, they're like, if you guys don't integrate with GoFetch, we're not going to switch our PIMs to you. And it's like because for them, wellness plans was a really important aspect of their workflow. And so I do think that these third-party companies have built really strong relationships. And if a lot of the work is happening there, um, they're in a really strong position. Granted, there is a risk that if too much of the work happens there and all the value accrues to that layer and all the monetization accrues to there, what does that look like? And I think that's in a like a sanctioned integration experience. And then the last piece of news that I would highlight is now we're seeing Scribe companies and ScribeNote as an example recently expanded their PIMS Pal widget to ease even some of the other practice management systems. And I think they're highlighting with that approach that, hey, for us to get that integrated experience, we can go through a different approach. And so for the audience who's not less familiar with it, they use a Chrome extension, but they basically are able to inject your scribe text into the specific fields of your PIMS by using kind of like a browser overlay and some scripts. And what they're doing is basically creating the perfect human in the loop element at that task so that the veterinarian or the veterinary team member can like double check it, can make some small configurations. And so again, you're keeping your same PIMS, but the action, that human in the loop step is really being managed by another party. And so taking a step back, the reason I think this is interesting is you're seeing like growth of the all-in-one systems. You're seeing increasing sophistication and increasing intelligence of these third-party applications and that are already kind of more traditional workflow tools. And then you're seeing these scribes, frankly, in a knife fight, getting increasingly creative with respect to how they are leveraging and interacting with your systems of record. I'm not sure which one will win out, but I think they will put competitive pressures on each other. And as a result, veterinarians are going to get better tools in a more affordable way. And if their current tools are not meeting the moment, there's likely going to be a lot of pressure on those companies, whether it's, native solutions or their ability to integrate with other parties. So I kind of share that because I think this is like the earliest, amuse bouche to the entree that will be, the Q1 of 2026. Well, every single company is going to announce a new wave of features that if you were tired and fatigued and confused before, you are going to just be bludgeoned over the head with options that unfortunately, like the companies that you might have partnered with that were like in these lanes are now all just colliding and overlapping with each other. And so as a veterinary company or as a veterinarian, it's actually really challenging because all of a sudden that really cool capability that you had last year for one company, now everybody has it. So you're using it in 3 different places. Are you getting rid of those other tools? Are you just going deep into this? How do you think about that? Who has that choice? Back to that context and user experience, like the user experience of an all-in-one PIMS versus a ScribeNote or a Covet versus an Auto, they're completely different products. And that's okay, but I think it highlights that a one-size-fits-all approach is likely to be sufficient.
And, Adam, one of the things I love about you is you took my 6th grade level needling of our own Aaron Massecar and his Covet, who is now a little more competitive with Auto, at least as far as what's claiming to being done, and turn that into an actually eloquent, informative segment for the audience. That really didn't even spike the softball I had lobbed at you. So I appreciate you not falling to my elementary school level of antics. Aaron, I'm really curious because you have a lot of experience talking to the profession and kind of understanding how they're seeing these tools, how they're using them, what they're worried about. How do you make sense of these new releases in light of what you've learned over the last several months or years?
I think it's awesome. Like, I think it's really awesome. We've said this a whole bunch on this podcast, but we'll continue to say it. We have never seen the adoption rate of something like scribing for anything else, right? The number of people, and there's some estimates that it's around 20% of the marketplace is using a scribing tool of some sort. And that's within basically a year, right? Because a year and a half ago is when they all kind of emerged. And it's crazy, right? So, really, really fast adoption. And I think the thing that it speaks to the most is the fact that the veterinary industry is not slow to adopt. They've just had crappy products thrown at them in the past. And now they have good things that they really like and they really enjoy. And yeah, Adam, to your point, it's hyper competitive. Like, it's not competitive, it's hyper competitive. And so when somebody launches a new tool or a new integration or a new browser extension or whatever it is, you see the other leading companies launching something similar within weeks, right? It's not even months or years. And so you're seeing this evolution of these tools. And so I'm just going to be totally honest. It's kind of frustrating when a tool like Covet or some of the other leaders that are in the space, they get lumped in with some of the other scribing solutions that are like baked into the PIMS, because it is not at all the same experience. It's just not. And I could list off a whole bunch of reasons why. And so what's happening is this space is turning into something different. And it really is turning into a companion space, right? It's not just a scribing solution. And the level of personalization that exists even now is providing veterinarians with tools that they didn't even know that they wanted before. And so there's all this like integration stuff that's happening that's kind of like baseline, just trying to smooth out some of the friction that exists in people's workflows. But what it's actually opening up, which I think is really fascinating, is a whole new area that we haven't seen before. So the number of insights that we're getting, for example, ability to provide feedback on communication skills in order to drive higher compliance, which then not only makes the veterinarian happy because the owner is receiving that recommendation and agreeing to it, but it's providing better healthcare for the animal. And then on top of that, it's likely driving more revenue for the practice and creating better relationships between the owner and the practice. And so there's a whole bunch of things that are just starting to blossom out of this space. So I think it's fascinating. I think one of the interesting things that we have not talked a lot about is that one of the things that a lot of the companies are doing is trying to get validated sources of information. So being able to have integrations with textbook manufacturers or third parties who are consolidating that information for the scribing companies and then serving it up. So how the workflow looks is a veterinarian would perform their physical exam, articulate their findings, go back to their desks. There would be a set of differentials that would be linked sources of information that are to textbooks, to journal articles, to whatever it is that's the most up-to-date information. And that is providing a level of confidence and trust in these tools because you can click back, right? So explainable AI, you can click back to this stuff. But what we haven't really talked about is something that we were talking about at the beginning. So Adam, when we start talking about those benchmark studies, what is the impact on veterinary medicine? Well, now we're developing these like collective pools of intelligence that in some instances might actually be better than some of the textbooks. And so there's this race that's happening for validated source of information versus best information possible without necessarily validation. And so there's this interesting race that's happening in the background of all of these tools that we're just starting to see play out because we're getting such good responses from native LLMs, these foundational models that don't actually require references to textbooks. Now, we could get into a whole debate as to like, how is that information being trained, and is it generating new information, or is it just leveraging the textbooks without properly citing them? Like that debate that's going on. But the net result is that veterinarians now have access to more information and more precise information than what they've ever had before. And we're just getting to the point where we can start measuring some of the outputs that we're seeing and measuring the growth of the veterinarians relative to that new access to information. So there's this whole new domain that's starting to blossom within these scribing tools that I think really highlights the difference between them and native tools that are existing in your PIMS. It's not to say that those are bad or not good or whatever. They might be sufficient for the workflows that people are working on, but there's more advancements that are happening.
The other point too, just like specifically on that waste some of the crowd approach, I think that this is really important because that reliance on like textbook information, take Vin as an example, right? People often go to Vin for the opinions of their colleagues. And it raises a bit of a question. It's like if you were asked a question and I give you three answers. One was a textbook reference, one was the opinion of 5 specialists, and one was the opinion of 100 regular veterinarians. What answer do you think is going to be more valuable? And I think if you would actually like do this through a series of questions, the 100 veterinarians get to a pretty good answer pretty quickly. Especially if you start to look at different, incentive models where if you have high performing veterinarians and high accurate questions, they get serviced up the same way that like your social feed algorithms, highlight, followed people and trending topics and things like that. And so there is this massive opportunity for these scribe companies to unlock the wisdom of the crowd of tens of thousands of veterinarians. And it's important because it's not just for that immediate decision support. You think about the millions of patient records that are non-digitized or that are like kind of locked on people's individual PIMs. How much like research intelligence is there? Like if we set this system up in a way where yes, we can get the immediate support, yes, we can get that kind of this differential treatment recommendations, but more broadly, we are curating this massive database of cases that we can then train to advance veterinary research or clinical studies or build improved algorithms. We really start to tap into the opportunity of the entire profession, which I think is much, much bigger, much more impactful than just like, how do you help me on this individual case? As an example, Antac's renal algorithms came from historically looking at 100,000 plus feline records and kind of realizing, oh, this is how we can predict kidney disease. And I think there are a variety of conditions and a variety of treatment and kind of efficacies that we will be able to really start to track and measure as a result of the exhaust from these dictation companies. And so I think that they are on, it's kind of like everybody's gotten to maybe Everest base camp, but the way to the peak is going to look very different with different levels of risk and different equipment needed. But I agree with you that they are fundamentally incredibly different. And maybe just to highlight this as an example, one is a personal account on your mobile device that you're bringing into the exam room. The other is like your work email on a desktop computer, as a button within your historical interface. Like physically and visually, they look different, right? So I'm not to say that there's not going to be opportunities for them to grow, but I don't think it is a monolithic experience.
And just sorry, there's something that Adam, you and I talked about a while ago, right? Like, how are people participating in the growth of AI, right? And how are they leveraging it and benefiting from it directly? And it's really interesting that a lot of it comes down to how they've created their own templates for their medical records, because the way in which people create their templates is a point of wisdom that they're able to now share collectively. So, for example, I was at Colorado State University. They're using Covet, and we were talking about how one person in cardiology has the ability to create a template that they just find produces better information and more accurate information. And then they immediately shared that template with their entire cardiology department. And so the development and the distillation of the wisdom that people have about how their workflows operate and their ability to quickly share that with other people is fascinating, right? Because and now we're on the cusp of being able to develop a marketplace for this. And the marketplace is not for commercial purposes. It's just a sharing place for some of these tools. And so for people to develop these, turn them into distilled sources of wisdom, and then be able to share that across to other people, like suddenly we're participating in this knowledge exchange of how to practice medicine in a way that we've never been able to do before. And I think that that's fascinating. That's something that nobody would have predicted a year ago. And yet that's where we are today.
I have something of a contrarian take here, and I think your points are incredibly thoughtful and valid. But the pattern that I see with these new developments, and even the way we're talking about them, is we are laser focused. I think that the tech industry serving this profession is laser focused on how to solve sexy problems of the clinician. Like, how do we really figure out what clinicians are worried about, what problems they see during their day, make their lives easier and better? And what I would argue is that I don't know that that's ultimately going to be what determines winners and losers in this market. I think probably what's going to determine winners and losers in this market is going to be predicted by the impact it has on the consumer. Any business that exists to it and thrives to the extent that it solves specific problems for its customers. And so what I'm curious about is like which this kind of obsessive thinking about how do we really kind of think through the user of the clinician. Like, maybe we need kind of a mindset shift here, almost Silicon Valley-esque, of product market fit. Like, how do we get veterinary practices to product market fit with consumers? Like, how do we solve problems from the mindset of how are pet owners showing up? Where are the gaps as far as what they need and what they're giving them? And of course, that doesn't mean like not getting excited about the advancing frontier of research. And there have been, honestly, like it's a little beyond the purview of at least this episode, but really incredible advances around like automating research for science that could mean really exciting things for the level of veterinary care we're able to provide. But where I kind of get stuck is, are we losing almost a sensitivity to the real driver of the market if we're just seeing things from the lens of how do we make veterinarians really excited? So with that, I'm not everyone's going to agree with me about that, but with Adam,
Yeah, like I know, I think it's a fair point. Maybe there's a couple different buckets to that. So, and this is there's a great paper that Matt Saloy and some of his colleagues put out about like the kind of the current state of the profession with respect to like are we in a recession, and obviously visits are going down. And so I think at the end of the day, like cost is certainly a significant barrier that I think when we consider these solutions and more broadly any solution that we're bringing to practice, is there an ability to change that cost, right? Related to that, is that I think that as prices have increased, people have a different expectation on the value that you're getting. And I think where you're starting to see these connections between the tools that Aaron and I were speaking about, and maybe that consumer perceived value, is if you have a veterinarian who's now able to say, look, I'm going to be able to focus much more on your pet. And because of technologies like Spotlight, et cetera, I am able to come to you from a more informed perspective, meeting you where you're at. I'm going to be able to focus on talking to you and putting my hands on the animal, as opposed to, behind a computer, clicking away. My team knows the care that we need to provide, so they're ready for that care. And then post visit, because of the tools that we've been using, you're getting more personalized summaries and more personalized communications as opposed to generic handouts. I do think while solving a problem for the veterinarian, the downstream implications are that it's a far better experience for pet owners. It's more personalized. It is more centered around your pet's needs. It's more efficient in the right ways. And I think that pet owners are going to have high expectations of their practices. I also think that these sorts of automations are going to allow practices to communicate the options financially to pet owners before and after the visit in a way that veterinary teams just aren't good at doing today, right? And so you can imagine if, hey, I would love to have a payment plan solution, a wellness plan solution for my practice, but historically that's taken 6 months to set up and our team doesn't have time to do that. Well, now it takes a couple of days to set up and it's marketing itself. That financial option now becomes a real made available to pet owners in a way that it hasn't before. Insurance, financing as well. And so I think the cost is something very important. And I'm hoping that this technology can be used to start to help people better predict their costs, plan ahead, connecting to better options, reinforce the value of care. But in terms of the experience that they're getting, I think that we've seen that traditionally selling software to clinics that they have to manage and implement in order to create the value for the pet owner has a lot of fragility and gaps. And if we can just get to that end state for the pet owner in a way where AI is overcoming those gaps because it's just taking care of the hard parts, you're going to see that lift in experience. And Aaron, like, not to put you on the spot here, but I know like those client summaries are things that Covet, among others, does. Like, have you seen data or examples of how that's changing the pet owner's perception of value of the veterinary experience?
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I'll give you one example, and it's purely anecdotal. I don't have a whole bunch of data around it, but for example, a veterinarian goes in, they articulate their exam findings, which is something that they're typically taught in vet school. Correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, but you're taught to like say what you're seeing. I don't know if you remember vet schools.
I wasn't in that class a year.
Ago.
I don't. Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
I remember there was a client and a pet though. Usually in the same room. Usually actually related in some way.
So articulate your exam findings, and then the AI.
And an
grabs
exam
that
is what again? Sorry, just
it's,
for the audience.
Yeah, it's when you put your hands on the animal and you do stuff. Okay, so instead of sitting there and looking or trying to look at both the animal, the owner, and the computer, you just walk in, put your hands on the animal, perform your physical exam, have a conversation with the client, and the tool is recording everything that you need so that you then walk out of the room, you have all your information collected for you. Okay, so a veterinarian does this, and then the owner says, "Oh, wow, I didn't realize that you were doing a physical exam. I thought you were just playing with my dog." And in what world would a veterinarian just ask for owners to come in so that they could play with their dogs? Maybe there are a few, right? And maybe that's like part of the enjoyment of the job for some people. But when they're doing their medical analysis of that animal, they can now focus directly on that relationship with the client. And so as a result of that, we're seeing that veterinarians and clients have better relationships because they're making eye contact, right? And on top of that, because they're articulating everything that they're finding, the animal owner understands way more about what's happening with the health of their animal. And so as the veterinarian saying, this is what I'm seeing here, there is this lump or there is some derm condition or something like that, then the owner is participating in the healthcare of the animal in a way that we haven't seen before. So to go back to your point that you were making before, Robert, like I don't think that it's like focus on the vet or focus on the owner, because if we just focus on the owner, then what is the central point of focus that we should be narrowing in on? But if we say, what is for the best care of that animal? And we think about the veterinarian as the care provider, as well as the animal owner as the care provider, then for us as a company, we're entirely focused on how do we make sure that that veterinarian has every bit of information that they need at the time at which they need it, and being able to serve that up in a way that is easily digestible for the veterinarian and for the animal owner. I think if we focus on the care of the animal, then that actually brings together both the veterinarian and the animal owner together into this like cycle of care. And so at that point, if that's the focus, then I think we'll have a much better outcome for those animal owners. We'll have a better patient experience, we'll have a better client experience, and we'll have a better veterinarian experience. That's what we're after.
I think it's interesting. I mean, honestly, I think this could be a subject that is a really interesting debate as to like what should tools functionally do for the profession. Is it improving patient care for that patient right there, or is it maybe amplifying the value per unit of time that veterinary professionals have for the entire market? That could be very abstract and philosophical, and I would love to spare our audience of that at least right now. And I'd love to dig into really the way that consumers are showing up and how they're using these tools. So we did a little bit of research. This was led by Allie Klein, who, by the way, his birthday it is today. We're going to sing happy birthday later, and our team at Digital Empathy. And so we have, for the unfamiliar, we manage around 600 different veterinary practices marketing campaigns, so their websites, Google Ads, blogging, SEO, things like that. And because of that, we have all this interesting data that AI is now allowing us to dig into a little bit more. So what we looked at is how our acquisition and lead patterns changing, especially since consumers are becoming more and more comfortable with these tools, even certain Luddites that have been speaking during the show. So, what we found is we took a look at January to September, and the results were pretty startling. What we found is that there was a 10x in order of magnitude increase in traffic coming to our websites from LLMs, from ChatGPT, from Perplexity, from Comment. And right now, it's still a drop in the bucket as far as overall traffic, but that's how exponential curves always look. You are a drop in the bucket until you very quickly become the dominant mode of of action. And I think the even more interesting insight that we found here was, okay, so we also have call analytics software. So it's really cool. It allows us to basically make sense of what's happening on these phone calls when somebody calls in. Is it being turned into a booked appointment? How is the team handling it? Are there opportunities for improvement? I think there's tons of opportunity looking at kind of like the customer journey from that perspective. What we found is that the pet owners who are being referred to by an LLM on average are asking more questions. They are more knowledgeable about what's going on. They are having longer conversations. And so I think this is going to kind of bust a myth that we have in the profession that it is bad for pet owners to do their own research online. I think in the past, there have been plenty of reasons to fear pet owners who are just like kind of listening to maybe, sources on influencers on social media. But LLMs are actually quite smart. They don't give crazy bad advice. Like they're going to shoot pretty straight. They're going to be pretty reasonably informed about the medical literature as to what's going on, be able to pattern match. And here's the thing, they're educating pet owners about the value of veterinary care. They are usually saying, hey, this is the kind of thing that you want to bring your pet to the vet for. Here are the valuable things that they're going to be able to be doing there. Do you have a relationship with a vet already, or do you need me to help you find a good one? And so I think kind of like the takeaway and the conversation I'd love to have here is we are very quickly seeing pet owners shift from just Googling symptoms or, looking on social media for other influencers or Facebook groups to ask their questions. We're still seeing that. But very, very quickly, consumers are starting to use these tools to ask questions about, hey, I found this lump. How do I know if it's cancer? Ask questions about these symptoms, these things they're seeing. And this is changing the way that pet owners are finding your practice right now. I promise you have pet owners who have found you through ChatGPT or similar avenues. So, Adam, Aaron, really curious to hear your takes, your thoughts about what we're seeing from the consumer lens and shifting behavior here, and just how we deal with that as a profession. Like, how do we make use of this information and adapt to this landscape that's shifting?
Yeah, I think it's super fascinating, and it's a whole new level of Dr. Google than what people have seen in the past, right? Because that was one of the biggest problems is like, well, I read this article and therefore it has cancer or, whatever it is. I think part of what you've said there is really important, and it's the open-mindedness of certain consumers going in and saying, from a perspective of curiosity, like, can I try to figure out what's going on with my animal? Can I be better informed? That sort of thing. I think the challenge becomes when, and I'll give you a specific example of this. I was giving a talk and one of the veterinarians in the audience said, okay, but a client came in and said, that's great, doc. I just need you to prescribe this medication because I've already gone on ChatGPT and I know that it's this particular disease, right? That's where it's not going to work. And so what I said to that owner and then, that veterinarian, and then we had a long discussion as a group, and what we kind of came to was the veterinarian has to be prepared to have those conversations with the client. And it can be incredibly beneficial to have a richer data source of information. So if somebody's going and asking questions of ChatGPT and trying to understand a little bit better, which might lead to uncovering of more information that might have seemed like incidental and not necessarily important. To now, how does a veterinarian respond when the owner says, I want X? And so we kind of talked about this, and we agreed that it's best if the veterinarian does not immediately dismiss the owner and say, what you have is not worthwhile, but instead say, there might be more context that I have that we need to add to what you've already done with ChatGPT in order to come up with a better resolution for your animal. So it's that kind of approach, because this is absolutely happening in medicine today, where owners are saying, I know what the answer is, so therefore just prescribe it. We want to try to avoid that as much as possible.
The other thing, though, is I think it comes back to how accessible are these clinics making themselves to meet people where they're at, right? So if you take that example, Aaron, and the person only has 5 minutes with the doctor, and the doctor's not engaging them, and they don't allow them to ask questions afterwards, like, you're creating so many barriers that of course they're going to drive me to other sources. And we've always had clients, there's always been a portion of clients that's like, I just want the med. But A, there's a lot of legal footing that you can explain, like, this is why I actually need to see your pet and why this is important. It is pretty much consistent with how we've always explained this. So there is an element of that. I think, Robert, back to your point of how people are discovering veterinary care, I think it's really important to understand that, yes, this can lead to a very different, in many cases, better visit, because to your point, ChatGPT is probably going to tell you you need blood work or hey, radiographs. Hey, I don't think those are necessary. Why are those necessary? Oh, this is what they search for. And you can get pretty far in understanding the value of different recommendations or diagnostics just independently. I think one of the things to be thoughtful about is, depending on the context and the setup that people have with their respective accounts, you're going to have individuals who's in their custom instructions are like, I'm a big fan of holistic practices and very frugal. Like, do everything you can in order to avoid, traditional medicine and paying my. On the other side, you might have people like, I want this system to know I deeply care about my pet. I will do anything for it. And the responses that people get as a result of having those instructions are going to be incredibly different. So what does that mean? One is that even if you ask the same question, you need to expect that the responses are going to bend to what people want. And as a veterinary profession, we can actually start to push people to say, hey, if you're using these tools, sounds you really like golden retrievers. You're asking me a bunch of really good questions about, studies and the most up-to-date medications. In ChatGPT, you should tell it that you're a really committed, loving pet owner to golden retrievers. And I guarantee when you do that, you're going to get way more veterinary-centric responses when you ask pet questions, right? And on the flip side, if somebody's getting an answer that is wrong, there's an opportunity to expand beyond just like, not just what did you ask, but like, how are you interacting and giving context to these systems? So that's one piece. The second part is the continuity in the experience. And what I mean by that is, right now we have a problem, which is that when you are discovering these veterinary options, the next best action is to then go to a website and place a phone call or book an appointment, versus, ChatGPT and OpenAI already have established relationships with groups like Stripe to do transactions for e-commerce purchases. So when you're actually searching for something, what's the best lamp for my office? It's going to give you that interaction where you can actually purchase the lamp there. And if we create a model where we don't allow those actions to happen in these LLMs, and we create so much friction that, hey, I'm going to give you these veterinary recommendations, but unfortunately, the one-click purchase experience to buy that medication, well, that's only available through Chewy. You're going to create so much friction to getting to that veterinary experience that people are just going to be driven to these other options. And on the flip side, if you are the only veterinary clinic that when people search on ChatGPT, they can book an appointment right there, they can buy a medication, they can purchase a wellness plan, whatever, you are going to have such an unfair advantage compared to all your other peers. And so we already see this in research like the Pet Desk Pet Owner Research Report, where the expectations, what people have on areas of appointment booking and refill medication and access to your medical records, it pales in comparison to the experience that they get. That gap just becomes amplified across LLMs when the friction to now do the best in class experience is effectively in a conversation, and people are still having to navigate your website, find your phone number, call you, only to be told like, we don't have that medication. So we have to think really, really thoughtfully about how we inject your local veterinary experience in the places where you're going. And it's going to be like the unfair advantage that practices had when they were the first ones on the block to have a website, right? There was this gold rush where if you were a practice with an online presence in like 2010, you crushed, right? Because everybody else was too hard to understand anything about. But now it's just table stakes. This is an opportunity probably for the next couple of years where you can crush just by being the one veterinary option on ChatGPT's results that you can actually do something with beyond placing a phone call or navigating to another website.
Oof. Goosebumps, Adam. Goosebumps. That's right. That is what we do
Why
here
I get that
for
looked
you.
at? I don't know if it's that captivating, but I appreciate it.
We,
If you were a digital marketing company like Digital Empathy, this is your time to shine. Demand more of your website providers. To the moon.
To the moon, my friend. Yes. All right. So that was scintillating. I would like to bring it home with some last takes and takeaways here. So let's go around the room. Aaron, let's start with you. Like, what do you think the audience should really be taking away from your perspective from this discussion?
Aside from the fact that it really doesn't take very much for Robert to get excited about anything, I For me, it's really like that gap. It's that gap between where the models are today and how people are using them. And I would just encourage more and more people to just try things, right? Like anything that maybe is slightly complex, especially anything that involves like math. I wouldn't say like, drug dosages or anything like that, but anything that you're thinking about around the home or anywhere else, like just try to use ChatGPT for it, especially with image analysis and video analysis. There's just so much that's there, so much rich texture that's available. So yeah, definitely try that. And yeah, that's it. That's it.
Yeah, I would say the same. Like the best time to start trying these tools was yesterday. The second best time is today, right? Like there are, there's already research, Digital published this like 2 years ago now, that the more exposure that you have to these capabilities, the more confident you are, the more optimistic you are. Your colleagues are using it. I wouldn't be surprised that ChatGPT is at 1 billion active users a week. Your clients are all using it. I think this is now more than ever the time where you really need to start to press it. And to Aaron's point, just because you get a response doesn't mean you have to use it, right? There's lots of things that I've looked at. I'm like, that's completely wrong. But I'm so glad I found the limitations and the kind of the hard, rough edges of these experiences, because then you can go back as the models progress. And imaging has been the best example for me. Like there are image prompts that were completely unusable, 6 months ago, that are now way, way better. And I think if you can start to use these tools in a way where you're building your own future, right? I was talking to an emergency criticalist this week who had set to build his own personal case library and had a decision support tool for his own resources, right? Like that's incredible. It's incredible. And I think if we stop like waiting on the world to change and more like end up creating our own world ourselves, there are a lot of these very point specific personal applications that now you can create more easily than ever before to give you what you need. And so I think that's a big takeaway. The second is, I think the market is now increasingly influential and vocal in their expectations around technology companies because of the strength of the off-the-shelf capabilities and because of the competition. And so personally, I'm super excited about like VMX and WVC, because I think you're entering a world in where the customer base is far more sophisticated. And as a result, companies are going to be pushed further to develop better solutions for this specific vertical, because like a simple wrapper on ChatGPT is no longer going to cut it. And as a result, I think there's going to be some real creative explosion in how people tackle these problems and meet practices where they are. So I'm hopeful that next year is the year where AI came for all the non-medical note generation workflows, and people got some of the gains that they had experienced personally in the voice to soap tools in every other workflow. Because I think there's a lot of tasks and a lot of roles in clinics that are probably still kind of scratching. I'd be like, why is my job still so hard? Why am I still copying and pasting? Why am I still repeating this? I thought this technology was supposed to make my life easier. And I still think we're at like the first feet into a marathon. And while promising, I'm kind of looking to see what the next, 50 or 100 feet look like.
It's going to be so exciting to see what is unveiled at VMX and Western. Maybe we need to do a veterinary AI brief listener meetup out there to talk about those exciting advancements. I don't know. You let us know in the comments, and we are at your service. I largely agree with both of you. I think to me, the takeaway, there are two takeaways here. One, any talk about an AI bubble or this slowing down is total bullshit. Like it's there are vested actors in pretending like this is a thing that's going to go away. We are very clearly seeing this is continuing on a logarithmic curve. These capabilities are growing quickly. It is going to show up more and more in the market because Google has emerged as a very capable frontier lab. And they have distribution and applications that others haven't had to date. OpenAI was completely from scratch. They don't have a Gmail. They don't have a Chrome. They don't have, your photos. Like there's just so many advantages that are going to make this show up in more and more places. The second thing I'd say is, I think if what you're looking to do is solidify and expand your market share as a business. In other words, win. If you want to win, seeing how consumers are using these tools and seeing how to meet them in the ways they're showing you what their needs are is going to be absolutely critical. So, in light of how we're seeing consumer adoption of LLMs and now evaluating and searching for veterinary care, I think, Adam, you brought up a really great point that LLMs are going to increasingly know the context of that pet owner and what their preferences are. Now, if your digital properties, your website, anything like that, is not able to effectively match and say, like, here are the things we're really good at as a practice, and allow the LLMs to kind of cross match and say, I know this about the pet owner. I know they're looking for this kind of practice. If you show up in the same commoditized way, like we sell veterinary services that almost every other practice does, instead of leaning into what your unique attributes are, telling your story, that sort of thing, you're not going to win here. So I think the way you win is by, one, listening to the Veterinary AI Brief and subscribing and telling your friends, and two, being on this wave instead of being crushed by it, and seeing where the opportunities are and getting that 10x advantage that you wouldn't if you weren't surfing this wave. That is our show for you, everyone. From the Veterinary AI Brief, Adam, Aaron, and Robert bid you a ton of success and excitement, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks, everyone.